Biological anthropology. We finished up our biological anthropology section. We're never done with biological anthropology, but in the sense of human evolution and how we got to be in all parts of the world. And we end up with humans being spreading out to all parts of what we consider the habitable world, including places that probably would have seemed inhabitable. If you just think about human evolution within Africa, you probably wouldn't think about humans going into some of these places and transforming them into habitable places where people live today. And we talked about how probably the main advantages that these Homo sapiens had over other creatures, enabling them to be in these different parts of the world, where they were not necessarily biologically adapted. And there are some biological adaptations that come along, and we talked about those, but that's not the main way that humans adapted to these environments. Adapted by being flexible, being able to make tools, change the environment, change ourselves, by being mobile, being able to migrate from place to place, and interacting with human groups all along the way. Human groups never became extremely isolated from one another, and they'd always be coming back into contact with each other and maintaining themselves as one interbreeding species across the range. So we learned that the idea of culture, how we learn, is crucial for humans to adopt. We rely on culture more than we rely on our instincts for survival. Now, part three is about how these human groups develop different societies. And we're especially going to be concentrating on what the archaeologists call material culture, the ways in which human beings dealt with different landscapes, different environments, started growing different things, and started sensing themselves as part of a group or part of a society in contrast to other groups or other societies. Now, in this class, we're mainly going to be talking about language. It's not preserved very well as archaeology. We'll be doing a tiny bit of archaeology. Petroglyphs, sure. So we'll see a little bit of archaeology. All right, here we go. Language. We haven't exited biological anthropology yet. Certain biological changes happened in evolution that allow humans to make this range of sounds that other primates are unable to make. And so we can do different things with all these throats and articulators in order to be able to make this range of vocalizations. Now, that doesn't mean that human language has to be audible or doesn't. You can do sign language and other forms of symbolic communication, but this is unique to humans beings in the primate category that we can make all these noises. Now, there are always evolutionary trade-offs to language, and the problem with this is you can choke. This is also unique to human beings. We are the only primates who can't breathe and swallow at the same time. So the trade-off to being able to make all these sounds is if you mess it up and something goes down the wrong pipe, then you're in trouble. So watch out there. Language can be very dangerous when misused. But yes, there's your human language, these unique sounds that we have. So one question has always been, to what extent is human language different or unique from the kinds of things that other primates can do? Because what do we know about those other primates? What can they do? Yeah, well, they can use those vocalizations and gestures, the great apes and those materials. So they do use these as a form of communication. And we can even teach them stuff. Taught a bunch of apes how to do sign language. So in some ways, I would say that in the last 50 years or so, the idea that human language is completely unique has been a little bit adjusted. We had Washoe, the signing chimpanzee who was raised to communicate. You had Koko, the signing gorilla. And perhaps the most advanced one is Kanzi the bonobo. And I was going to show you some Kanzi the bonobo videos, but you can go look on YouTube and just type in Kanzi the bonobo, and you can see Kanzi the bonobo talking to Oprah Winfrey, and you can see Kanzi the bonobo roasting a marshmallow over a fire and doing all these kinds of things. So I would check that out if you want. So we have, in some ways, adjusted our views that human language is completely unique and separate. However, what humans can do that the great apes don't seem to be up to when they are basically trained to do sign language and imitate human signs is what we call novel production, or the ability to make new and creative sentences. So if I tell you to look at the purple elephant floating over Joe's head, you have to know where Joe is. There you go. You should all be looking back and you can see a purple elephant floating over Joe's head. No, you can't. But you can imagine that, and it made you do something. Now, Kanzi cannot make me look back at a floating purple elephant. It does not have the ability to create these new things that have never even been said before, to create completely fantastical things. And so the other thing about human language is the sign language that has been taught to some of these great apes is relatively simple. Human language relies on a complex grammatical system that has shared rules so that we can all, within our particular language, understand what the other person is saying. Si estamos hablando otro idioma, no pueden entender nada. So if you switch into a totally different language, unless you've been raised with that language or know what they're talking about, it doesn't make any sense. Now, most of these rules, they tell us, these shared rules, for the most part, you don't learn them in school. And that's one of the incredible things about human languages. In fact, people haven't had formal schooling for most of human history. You just learn these things, you absorb them, and you're able to create these grammatical sentences according to shared rules that you don't even realize are part of your subconscious. So the other thing about humans' languages is they're highly symbolic. They're not necessarily associated. There's no necessary association between the symbol, the sound or the gesture that is being produced, and the object out there in the world. In fact, humans are, we've talked about this, are extremely symbolic creatures. We swim in symbolic worlds. So much so that there's a whole discipline that's been created, a whole study that you have for how we use symbols. Semiotics. Yeah, so if you want to get really into this stuff, you'll go study semiotics, which is the use of symbols and how we move through a world, not just with language use, but all the ways in which symbols guide our behavior. Now, before we get into all these symbols, I want to talk a little bit about variability within language, or they want to tell us about variability within language. So we see this, we'll talk about our own language, but I want to be clear here that variation exists within any language. Any language is going to have different ways of speaking it, different languages within it, to an extent, sometimes you might say. And I want to make this clear because we're going into a study of societies, or what we might call cultures. And this also applies to any human society or any what we might call a cultural group. There is always going to be variation within any human society. So we often try to sum up whole societies or sum up whole languages. And there are sometimes generalizations you can make about people, but just keep in mind that variation is going to be important. And that in some ways, the people who want to standardize your language, who want to tell you how to speak and what words to use and when to use them, it's not just that they are concerned with the meanings of words, although there are people who are concerned with the meanings of words. Oftentimes, they're trying to enforce a standard because they're trying to make certain language varieties unacceptable or to try and enshrine power within a society. So that's why your textbook, they use the term mainstream white American English. We used to call this standard English. The idea that there is a standard English variety which everyone should speak, and they want to draw attention to the fact that this is actually a variety of English which has been in some ways imposed upon the rest of society. So mainstream white American English is one variation of English. And in mainstream white American English, there is one version of the word ask, and that is it. There is not this other version that circulates around. If you use the other version, then you are often stigmatized or said to be uneducated or whatnot. I, by the way, grew up with some of the whitest language varieties. I won't even try to pronounce this word in different ways, but it is often associated with what they call Black Englishes or Black languages, which can have their own grammatical and phonetical structure and rules to them, which again is often stigmatized in our society when we say that people should learn so-called standard English. The interesting thing about these varieties, as they make clear, is that both of these types and even more types were used back in England 500 years ago. So if you look at a map of England where English supposedly originated, you have all these different versions for how to pronounce the word ask. And in fact, some of them we like axe and ox might not even use today. So the fact of the matter is these things were standardized, not because they were necessarily the right way to do things, but because people wanted to have more power, be able to put down other people in another society. But in terms of how people use this, they were both equally valid ways of speaking English back in the day and continue to be today. So what this brings us to, where they talk about what happens here, is the notion of indexicality. That the way you speak a language signals your membership in a certain group. And technically, what indexicality refers to is that it's when language, you need the context. You need to be in the context in order to interpret a statement. So take a couple examples from the quiz. For example, the capital of France is Paris. Indexical or not? No. Why not? It's a statement that you could make anywhere in the world, and hopefully, and you should be able to understand it. You don't have to be in a certain context to know this is a propositional statement. It's very specific. Indexical? Very indexical, right? You have to know what day you're in. You have to know what this is. Did I buy this? This? What did I buy? So unless you're in the place, you don't know what's going on. No. Some of you wanted to say that this was indexical. It's not as indexical as the I bought this yesterday, but you can make an argument for indexical. By the way, most daily language is indexical. Most of the time, when we're talking to each other, we need the context in order to figure out what is going on. Most of the time, we do not speak in propositional statements. In fact, there are only certain places where you will hear a lot of propositional statements. Where do you hear propositional statements? Classrooms specialize in these kinds of propositional statements that you're supposed to absorb as information. Remember, if they're all indexical, then that's more like daily life. Yes. Okay, so fun. So we're starting to talk about how we make language out of meaning. Our textbook tells us, or the linguists tell us, that there are 3 types of signifiers. Ooh, wait a second. That's already a big word. What is a signifier? Linguists divide up the world talking about the difference between the signifier and the signified. So the signified is that thing out in the world. The signified is Larry himself. The signifier is the word Larry. See what I'm saying? The signified is the table itself. That's the signified. The signifier is the word table. There's 3 types of signifiers. One is called an icon. An icon is something that resembles the concept itself. So if I had a picture of that table, or they use the deer crossing where there's a symbol for deer up there, then you have an icon. iconography when you go into a Catholic church, for example, and there's different icons for saints and Jesus, and then it resembles a thing that it's supposed to be. There's another type, which is called the index, is where we get this indexicality thing. Rishpa, what is an index?
Actually, presented directly.
Represent without being presented directly. Yeah. I mean, in my view, the index is like your index finger. It's pointing to something without it actually being there. They use the example of smoke indexing fire. So you see the smoke and you think, where there's smoke, there's fire. It doesn't have to be, but you're thinking it's probably there because it's pointing or it's giving evidence to something. And then there is the symbol, which is most of our language. There's no physical resemblance between the characters that we use, the objects, or there's no resemblance between the sound of a word and the thing it represents, except in certain cases where we try to make sounds like that thing. So these are the three types of ways in which we use signifiers. I use this example. Are there any icons on this sign? I'm tempted to say no. I'm tempted to say there's no icons. I was wondering if that arrow was an icon, but it's more like an index. It's pointing to somewhere else. And then they say that today is actually indexical. Because what's the problem with today? Is this a good sign to put out if you want to get people to your garage sale? Yeah. You never know when today is. It is a good sign on the morning of your garage sale to put up, but then you should probably take it down because it doesn't make any sense then. But yes, today is also indexical. It points these two things are pointing to a time and place. And then, of course, the word garage sale is completely, there's nothing about those words. It's a completely symbolic association that we have. So the point of the matter is, or one of the points is that all language is going to require this interpretation. It doesn't just have meaning in and of itself. Even things like icons, you might think, is that a deer? Is that a moose? Is that an elk? What are they trying to tell me here? And so we have two different things that they talk about, which is encoding, in which we have an idea and we want to put it into a sign. Here's somebody who wants to have a garage sale and want to draw people to it, and they're converting that meaning into several types of signifiers, or at least two types of signifiers. And then what we have to do when we receive these signs, we have to decode them and convert them into something that's meaningful. Now, in most cases, decoding language, you need the context. Like I said, most of our everyday language is indexical, and we can't interpret it outside of the context. And even that language, which is not indexical, you usually need some emotional context in order to interpret it. For example, if I say, the house is on fire, we're just sitting here looking at a house that's on fire. However, if I say, the house is on fire, what should you do? You should be running out the door, right? So you have the same 5 words, but a totally different meaning or a totally different action based on what's going on. Now, this has been an issue when people develop the technology of texting each other, is that it's sometimes hard to understand what somebody is saying just from the words alone. If you only had words, then sometimes you might misinterpret the context of what you're saying. So what do you need there? You need to convey emotion. What do you need? You need emojis. And so emojis have come to our rescue, because without emojis, we wouldn't know if somebody's mad or sad, or we need to run from the fire or just look at it, laugh. We need all these emojis to convey that emotional sense. But we run into problems. What happens with these emojis? You always send the right one? They can be interpreted differently for each person. Is this funny? Yeah, I don't even know what's going on there, but Somebody does. So all these things point to the fact that we need emojis, we need this emotional context, but then that again gets interpreted. At least I've been learning these things. I never end my messages with a period anymore because I don't want to, piss off my kids and think that I'm mad at them for doing that. Don't use periods. So even things like this petroglyph, this potentially could be an icon. So here's a petroglyph from a few hundred years ago that you can go see. If you're a tourist, you might say, oh my gosh, look, stork bringing a baby to the parents. So some people are seeing a baby, some people are seeing a frog. The frog is actually important because, as it turns out, if you talk to the people who live in this area, they do have some ideas about the tradition of different clans, like frogs and birds, as composing perhaps a story about what is going on here. And so what this tells us is, again, it's hard to get, from archaeology, it's hard to get language and meaning, but it tells us that the way in which we get our meanings is often what we call situated knowledge. You have to be there and you have to put it into context, or there are different interpretations for the kinds of ways in which a statement can be made. For example, if the coffee is spilled, what might that mean? Yeah, so the word coffee can actually mean various things, especially in a grocery store. If they say there's spilled coffee on aisle 5, bring a mop, then somebody spilled their coffee. Somebody says there's spilled coffee on aisle 5, bring a broom, then somebody's either spilled some ground coffee or maybe coffee beans are on the floor there. So this has a situational content to it.